The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit genetec.com. That's GENETEC.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brine Hamilton.
Hi there, everyone. Clearly, I'm not your regular host, Brine Hamilton. This is Sarah Miller. You may remember me from episode 8. So today is a very special episode of the Healthcare Security Cast where we are going to be interviewing our host, Brine Hamilton. So, Brine, thank you so much for having me back on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Sarah. It's interesting being on the other side of things.
Wonderful. So to get us started, what can you tell us about Brine Hamilton?
All right, about me. I'm 38 years old. My wife, Tanya, and I will be celebrating 13 years of marriage this August. Father of 4. So my kids, in there I have 8-year-old twins. So my kids' ages are 11, 8, and I have a 3-year-old that'll be 4 in July. I'm a 15 years security professional. So I started off working in a mall and obviously transitioned into healthcare along the way. Most of my time has been in healthcare. And for the last 5 years as well, I've been an education professional. So I've taught at 3 local colleges. In there, I've taught at Fleming for all of those years, Fleming College in Peterborough. So yeah, it's a little bit about me, just I guess kind of an average guy and nothing too interesting, but that's Brine Hamilton.
But still pretty spectacular background. And something that I'm personally curious about, I don't think I've ever asked you, how did you end up in healthcare security?
Okay, well, so I was working for a security company. Like I had mentioned, I started off in a mall. I was able to get a promotion as a supervisor on another site. And I had actually tried to get out of the security industry. I was, looking to do something else. My education was actually in a communications related field. So I was looking to get back into that. And, I'd taken on a full-time role in that. So I'd actually given 2 weeks notice at the job that I was at. And there was a gentleman who came in named Hamid Farouk, who worked at a hospital where I ended up working at. But we got talking over lunch. This was his part-time job, and he had just mentioned, his job at the hospital working for an in-house program. And he told me a little bit about it, the compensation, kind of the structure, the things that happened there. And it was something that kind of piqued my interest. So, I'd asked him about applying. Like he said, give me your resume. I'll hand it in, and I can guarantee that you'll get an interview. Of course, this is the one day I didn't have any resumes on me because I had just accepted another job. So I had to kind of scramble. I ended up going on Google, Googling the hospital, which was University Health Network. I fumbled my way to finding the security department. I talked to a gentleman who later, his name was Tim. He was the one who answered the phone. And I just asked for the fax number for the supervisor so I could send in my resume because we were still faxing things at that point. I faxed my resume in. I was fortunate enough to get a call back. And I actually almost didn't go to the interview. The night before the interview, I was playing basketball, some pickup basketball. And I ended up, me and someone else were going after a loose ball. And I banged my eye on their shoulder and ended up with a black eye. But by the time I woke up the morning of the interview, it had swollen to the point where I couldn't open my left eye at all. So I was like, this is a really bad look. This is the type of opportunity I've been looking for. But, I'm going to go in there with a black eye. There's no way they're going to hire me. But I went anyways. I said, you know what, I'm just going to go and hopefully all goes well. So I had my interview with Carl Valentine and a gentleman named Calvin Brown, who was one of the charge officers. And the first thing I did when I walked in the room was explain my plight and explain why I had this massive black eye, and just really reiterated that I'm not a troublesome person. It just happened while I was playing basketball. So luckily they were both basketball fans, so I think that helped. The interview, it felt like it went well. And Carl had said to me at the end of the interview, if you don't hear from me by Friday at 4 p.m., that means that we went in a different direction. there's a lot going on at the time. When I got hired, the hospital was my third job because I was paying for a wedding at the time. And, we wanted to make sure that we did that without incurring any debt. So both my wife and I were working quite a bit. I remember the Friday where I was hoping to get a call from Carl. My wife had called me at 10 to 4 and she would say, "Hey, did you get a call from the hospital?" And like, at that point, no, I don't think I'm going to hear anything. So, it looks like it didn't happen. I'm sure the black eye had something to do with it. And, she encouraged me. She said, "Don't worry, there's going to be other opportunities." I hung up from that call, and at 3:58, my phone rang with a private number. So I answered it. Of course, it was Carl, just telling me, that I'd been hired, and I started training on Monday. I scrambled around, adjusted things, went in, and that was kind of how I got started in healthcare. So my first opportunity was as a casual security guard, and just kind of worked my way into a full-time position and worked my way through some of the ranks there at University Health Network. And it was a great experience. And that was where I really kind of developed this passion for healthcare security.
Wow. And from there, where did you go to next in health?
So I was there for a good number of years. The thing was, I didn't really focus on growing my career. Originally, when I started doing security, my ambition was to get into law enforcement. After I actually got married and had my first son, and then more kids came along, I think I decided at that point that law enforcement wasn't going to be for me, just because I realized I hated working nights, having kids at home. You have to do a lot of shift work if you're going to be in law enforcement. So I wanted to find something that was more kind of a 9 to 5, where I can focus on spending time with my family. And I had already developed this passion for healthcare. I really enjoyed it, and I
Mhm.
somehow I got involved with IAHSS. My director Todd Milne had introduced the IAHSS training, and it was really when I got involved with IAHSS, I did the first CHSO, the basic level certification. Once I had completed that, I signed up for a membership, and from there I got more involved, and that was what kind of helped me grow in the industry. I had exposure to a lot more things, and my first opportunity to actually in a bona fide leadership role was a gentleman named Martin Green had reached out to me for a position that was opening up at Baycrest Health Sciences. And I was working for a contract company, but reporting directly to Martin on site, and kind of being the liaison between the site and the client. It was essentially a contract manager position. So I took on that role. I was there for about a year and a half, and then I ended up working at another proprietary hospital program as a security coordinator, and then from there I moved on to Garda World, where I am now as the healthcare security specialist and operations manager.
Wow, what a journey. And it sounds like you had quite a few people who influenced you along the way. So, in addition to the people who you've mentioned, like Martin, Farouk, who else would you say are your top influences and mentors in your journey?
I guess my first, influencer and mentor, I'd say, is my dad. My dad, when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot when I was young. So my dad was a guy who worked a lot. So I think I developed a lot of my work ethic just from seeing him. He worked as many as 3 jobs at a time, sometimes more. But yeah, I still remember being young and him actually putting on his wrong uniform. He's putting on his pizza delivery uniform to go to his job at Oshawa Foods at the time, which is now it's now Sobeys. He was someone who really worked hard. He one of the pieces of advice that he gave me that kind of stuck with me my whole life is, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. This came at a time when I was actually working with him, as we did work together for a little bit. And he'd give me that piece of advice, and it just kind of stuck with me. So it's kind of shown in many areas of life. I think one example I'll give, I guess, is my wife. So if you've met me and my wife is I'll say that she's out of my league, because she is. But had I not, if I would have just taken, my first inclination would have not been to approach her at all. But had I not done that, had I not followed my dad's advice, my life would be a lot different today. So he was my biggest influencer and my biggest mentor. As far as other mentors, and some of these are, like, I would say there was some formal mentorship, or it was maybe more where I just took a lot from them and they didn't really necessarily know that they were influencing me. But Todd Milne was another big one. I mentioned Carl Valentine. Carl, Todd, and Paul Kitely were essentially my managers when I worked at University Health Network. So I really learned a lot from them, just in the way that they conducted themselves on a daily basis. They're 3 really unique leaders with different skill sets, and I feel like I was able to learn a lot from all 3 of them. So they were definitely big influences. Martin Green, again, another person that I worked with for a year and a half directly. Always maintained, a good relationship with Martin. He was one who really was the motivation for me getting more involved with IAHSS. He had pushed me to actually run for a local chapter position as the chapter treasurer, and I was successful in that election process. So that was really where I got my start. But he was one of the main ones who really pushed me towards volunteer leadership. Brad Stewart is another one. Brad Stewart's always someone who I can rely on for advice. He's just a wealth of knowledge. I think he's one of the low key, real kind of rock stars, if you will, in this industry. He's very well. He can articulate himself quite well. He knows quite a bit, and he just kind of flies under the radar. Though he's not he's more of a behind the scenes type of guy, but he's someone who I've been able to rely on, and he's been a really good friend. Scott Jupp's another one. I'll go back to my first. So I remember it was May 14th, 2014, I believe it was. It was the first IHSS meeting I'd attended. And, at that meeting, I met a lot of the people who I would say are still mentors and influencers. Paul Greenwood was one, Noreen Milne, Andrew Arris, Ken Close, Martin Green. So this is my first time meeting a lot of these people, and a couple of them I've since worked for, but it all kind of stemmed from that meeting. And I remember we went out after that meeting, and there's a conversation that was happening at the table. I was sitting beside Scott, and he really just started explaining some things to me that I didn't understand that were part of their conversation, just because I wouldn't have had exposure to it at that point. And it was just interesting because he was really, I didn't seek it, but he probably realized I didn't understand what was happening in this conversation. So he just really started breaking down some of the finer points of, the contract side of security, which was something, again, I didn't have exposure to at a leadership level. So it was some valuable information that I've been able to kind of apply to what I do now. And then some other ones. So other people who've influenced me, Don McAllister, obviously, Don McAllister and Tony York worked together and collaborated on a textbook that's really the gold standard for our industry. And just having him as a resource and a professional colleague that I can reach out to, him and Tony York, has been really helpful. And of course, again, they're ones who set a great example. So there's that influence piece. Sergio Angelucci, he was my client service manager when I worked with Martin at Baycrest. He was the one in the position prior to me. So he really exposed me to some things about the industry as well that, again, just being in a proprietary program, I didn't really have as much access to. So he was helpful in that way. I mentioned Paul Greenwood. Paul is just one of those guys who's a consummate professional, speaks very well. So he's someone who I always paid attention to when he's speaking at events or things like that, because he's just so articulate. So I try to kind of take some of that from him. Some of the other leaders who've really influenced me, Lisa Terry, Bonnie Michaelman, just through their involvement with IHSS and developing content, and being, again, people who are presenting a lot, who speak well. Eric Clay is another one. Bill Navahar. A lot of people who are listening will probably know Bill Navahar. I remember the first time I got a call from Bill Navahar, I felt like I had finally accomplished something in my career, because I used to always hear about these calls that people would get from Bill. So I think, I think that was kind of a turning point for me. I felt like I had accomplished something when I got my first phone call from Bill Navahar. Joe Magana, again, I'd mentioned Ken Close, who I had worked with at Trillium Health Partners. Noreen Milne, Jeff Young. Jeff Young was the president of IHSS when I was first really getting involved. The first conference that I had attended for IHSS, first ACNE, I remember him saying that we need to be more business-like, and that's something that I've really kind of taken seriously, and try to make sure that I have a good professional appearance whenever I'm representing our industry, and just try to be very professional. But that was just kind of something that I learned from him. Kevin Toohey, another guy who's just been a great influence. Paul Sarnice, who is currently our president-elect for IHSS. I actually, the first time that I tried to get on the board of directors, I had to run against Paul Sarnice, which, I would hate to see what the results were. They would probably be quite humbling. But Paul Sarnice has been someone who's been a great mentor as well. When I first got on the board, he welcomed me with open arms, and he gave me a lot of help because I was stepping into the position that he was just finishing up his term as the member at large. So he's been a great influence. One that people probably wouldn't expect, and I don't think I've actually really told anybody this, was Bob Moore. Bob Moore is a gentleman who works for IAHSS Communications. And one of the first events that I attended was a career expo. And Bob was one of the speakers, and he gave some advice that was, if you want to grow in your career, become an amazing public speaker. So I don't think I met him really briefly that day. And again, this was years ago, but I took that advice seriously, and I've spent a lot of time just developing myself as a speaker and a communicator. And that was just because of the panel that he was on and that one comment that he made, and it was true. As far as education is concerned, there's quite a few people who have influenced me. Nancy Newton being one. She gave me my first opportunity to teach, and that was at Fleming College. She's since passed away, but she had a profound impact on me and my career and teaching. Dan Swartz, who's the program coordinator for the Police Foundations program at Humber College. Gary Galbraith from Seneca College. Marilyn Hollier, again looking at IAHSS connections. I remember one of the first Focus on Healthcare event that I was at. She was one of the speakers, and just seeing the size of the program that she was running at the time, and there was so many things I was able to take from people like her, Alan Butler, John Westall, who I serve on the board with, Isaac Luton, Colleen Kusara, who was our executive director for IAHSS. A few guys who stood out, just being somebody that I could look to as someone who was similar to me, a few gentlemen of color, which is, guys like Keith McGlenn, Myron Love, Darren Morgan, all very professional guys who are respected in our industry. It's been awesome meeting those guys and seeing what they're doing in their careers. And, those are definitely individuals that I look up to. And then one of my current leaders, Amir Atri, someone who I've learned quite a bit from in, the bit of time I've worked with him. It's been about a year and a half, but he spent so much time in this industry and knows so many different elements of it. He has his foundation from healthcare as well, but he's a lot more diverse in his experience. So he's someone who I've learned a lot from. Jason Snyder, again, another good influence, one of my colleagues, one of the branch manager where I work. Again, just some different skill sets that I don't have, but been able to learn quite a bit from him. And there's a lot that I'm forgetting. I know I've mentioned a lot of people. The last one I'll mention is Sam Asselstein. Now, Sam Asselstein, when I met him, he worked for G4S. He now actually works for Garda Worlds in a different branch, so we're colleagues now. But he's someone who I've maintained a great relationship with since I've known him. Just a really good guy, someone who's always been willing to help me out, even when we worked for competitors. We were working for different contract providers, but he's someone who's always just maintained a good professional relationship with me. So someone who I have a lot of respect for, and great to be working with him. But yeah, all of these people are people who I've tried to learn things from or adapt some of what they do and apply it to how I conduct myself. But again, like I said, I'm probably forgetting people, but I think I've mentioned a lot. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Wow, what an answer. So very, very clear that you've had a lot of people join you in your journey, and there were a lot of names that I recognized as well who have helped myself, and it's just such a wonderful community. Security in general, education in general, but especially healthcare security. So something I noticed that a lot of your influencers and mentors have in common is that IAHSS connection. And of course, you are on the board and you're also involved here locally in Ontario with myself. What would you say about your experience so far in a volunteer leadership role with this organization?
I guess I'll start off by just giving some context of how I've been involved with IAHSS. I mentioned earlier my first experience in a volunteer leadership role. And prior to that, I was involved with events. Like I would always volunteer to help out, things of that nature when we put on an education event, which actually, if I remember correctly, you were the only student who actually came to that event.
Yes, I was.
At that time, I was actually the treasurer though, but with the golf classic that we do every year in Ontario, I've just always, volunteered and tried to help out however I could. But when there's an opportunity to move into the treasurer role, I ran for that election. I was successful. I was in that position for, I believe it was a year and a half before there was some shuffling, and partway through the year, our chapter treasurer had to step down because of a career move. But I was successful in that election, so I became the chapter treasurer. While I was the chapter treasurer, I was able to actually get involved internationally with IAHSS, working on the Education Council. And I chose the Education Council because the 50th ACNE was coming up, and I wanted to be involved in that whole planning process. I think the 100th one will be a bigger deal, but I'll be in my 80s at that point. I don't know how active I'll be in my career, so I wanted to make sure I was a part of kind of this big milestone event. After that, I was on a second attempt, be successful in being elected to the board as a member at large. Right now, I'm currently involved as the board liaison with the Guidelines Council, which is again full of a bunch of superstars. There's some really smart people in that group. A lot of people I've mentioned. Mark Reed is another one. Mike Lauer, Anjanette Hibert is another one. And I think one of the great things about IHSS is just because you get to meet people from so many different parts of not only the country, but or even the continent, but you can connect with people around the world. So you get to really get a good breadth of experience that you can leverage and learn from. So that's been one of the huge benefits, is just the people that you meet, and these are great people, right? Like, these are folks who want to give back to their industry, and they're giving up their own time to do that. So that's the quality of people that you're with, and that's a big advantage of being involved. I've also been involved with some of our projects, like the e-learning projects, bringing the e-learning platforms from the book-based model to a digital platform. And then also just talking in terms of volunteer leadership, I've also been involved with As Is locally. So I did serve on the Education Council for 3 years, but IAHSS has become my main area of focus, especially with becoming a board member. And I guess, sorry, I don't think I answered your question fully. So the experience, it's been a great experience. Again, I've been able to meet a lot of people. I've been able to learn so much. And just those connections I've been able to make have really helped me do this endeavor, this podcast. If it weren't for the connections that I made, like I didn't realize how many people were involved in this industry when I was just working at one hospital and focusing on there. Just the amount of connections I've been able to make in the last few years and learn from people globally, it's been amazing, and that wouldn't have been possible without being involved with IAHSS. Obviously, now there's a lot less barriers with everything being digital and having all these social media platforms and all these online platforms that you can leverage. But I think the foundation was IAHSS, and even with all these platforms existing previously, I wouldn't have been able to really establish some good friendships and connections globally without being involved.
Outside of the work that you do with IAHSS, how would you describe a day in the life of Brine Hamilton?
Day in the life of Brine Hamilton, it's probably less exciting than you would think. Really, I work my day job doing a lot of account management related stuff, especially with the healthcare clients. I think everybody's had experience in the kind of that management side of things. It's interesting, but I don't think it's going to be outside of the scope of what people would expect. You mix in there some IHSS responsibilities. For example, you have regular calls that you attend, being involved with both the board and different councils, and different endeavors that come up kind of on an ad hoc basis. Those are some of those are kind of unpredictable. They come as things are happening, but you just always have to make sure to account for that. And sometimes I have to adjust my work day, so I'm going to put in a couple more hours because I was in a meeting, for a couple of hours, things like that. There's always preparation that are involved with these meetings as well. So there's a lot of a lot of research, reading, really, really, I guess, stimulating stuff, if you will. I enjoy that, though. I've said before, I'm kind of a healthcare security nerd, so I enjoy learning things about this industry. During the second semester of the school year, so from January to April, at that point, you can add 1 to 2 days a week of me traveling to teach at one of the local colleges I teach at. And then one thing that I've kind of shifted to in the last few years is that I try to plan my day around my family. And just to kind of give you some context into what I mean there, I try to account a certain time, like I'll set the goal of trying to be home for dinner or what have you, having that time, from that uninterrupted time for a few hours, just I can dedicate to my wife and kids. And then when my kids go to bed, it's, kind of back to it. But I think the strength in that is, if something does happen at work and I do have to stay late or I do have to get involved with something, it's not as big of a deal because my family still knows they're my first priority. Again, with our work, it's kind of, things are really never done. And that's why we have jobs, essentially. There's always something going on. And if you really let yourself fall into it, you can you could really just work nonstop at the end of the day. So really just trying to have that balance. I plan around them. Once my kids are in bed, I have some time with my wife. After that, it tends to be a lot of, actually right now, it's time preparing for this podcast, scheduling people to be on the podcast, doing a lot of editing. Editing is a very important piece of it. And yeah, sometimes that will take me and that will give me some late nights, but again, this is all stuff that I enjoy doing. So just making sure that I have some balance in there as well, so I don't burn out. But yeah, I guess that's it. It's not very interesting. I hope I didn't bore people too much, but yeah, just a lot of preparation and then execution, I guess, if you will.
No, not at all. What you had said about security, you know, being a constant job and, it being so easy to just work nonstop. It's so essential to plan out your day and make sure that you honor your commitments and set your priorities. All very important things. So great advice to share with the rest of our listeners here as well. And on the note of planning, I know with your work with IAHSS, you also are involved with future projects. What excites you most about the direction that the association is taking?
Well, I think the thing that excites me most right now is that we're finally moving to a point in time where everything is digital. We have so much available online, from webinars, like all of our educational content is going to be online. The webinars, I think, were a great value add for members, because if you're a member, they're free and they're basically going like basically a bi-monthly cadence. So you get 6 of those a year. And these are good quality webinars. You have some, again, industry leaders who have a lot of great insights to share. I think that's exciting, just to see the growth of that. The CHPA accreditation excites me as well. So it's kind of hard for me to just say one thing. There's a few things. CHPA accreditation is the next thing, because I think that's really going to help us establish ourselves as professionals, I guess, to other healthcare professionals. You're already seeing it a lot now, where CHPA is a requirement for some of these higher profile positions in healthcare security. But I think you're going to see a lot more credibility coming with it being accredited. And it's something that can only benefit our industry and the professionals that work in it. As far as, I guess, the last thing that really excites me is just the opportunity for growth, both locally and globally. When you look at some of just the number of hospitals there, we're at about 2,300 members, give or take, right now. So there's obviously a huge opportunity for us to grow our sphere of influence just within the industry. There's lots of hospitals where there's not an IAHSS member. So I think a great endeavor would be to just to get somebody planted in each of those facilities. So that's one thing that excites me. Also, I did mention the global aspect of things. We've had a lot of opportunities lately, well, even just myself personally, I've had opportunities to connect with healthcare security professionals around the world. I think in the future we are going to have a lot more global presence. But again, that's just one of the things that excites me, because we're really starting to get that message out there, and people are starting to see the value that IAHSS brings to the table if you're a healthcare security professional.
So based on the direction that you're anticipating here, what do you think the association may look like in 10 years from now?
It's hard to say 10 years from now, but I think one thing that we'll see is, again, and kind of piggyback what I just said, we'll have a much stronger global presence. I see us having a lot more chapters in different continents. So I think that's something that will definitely be a thing. We'll see a lot more global members. I think IHSS is now just starting to become more ingrained in the healthcare environment. A lot of people are starting to see what we bring to the table, from nursing associations. This is just slipping my mind right now, but there's so many other things that we're involved with through affiliations, ASHI, or the Canadian equivalent CHESS, so the healthcare engineers. And I think too, one of the things that we will see is our security leaders being more involved with the cyber side of things and IT. Now I don't know if that will ever happen. That's something that we've talked about a lot, and some programs have actually shifted that way already, but I think we'll see a little bit more of that, and a little bit more of that in the future IAHSS learning materials.
How would you say that we get to that point? We elevate healthcare security, we elevate IAHSS, we get to that point.
Well, again, I'll piggyback a little bit of what I said. The accreditation is going to be a huge part of that, and because just the credibility that comes with being accredited by a body that's respected by the healthcare community. The affiliations, because again, that's just better brand awareness, better exposure, and the training that we offer, the training that we do. Again, all of these things are improving the professionalism of what we do, and really focusing on improving these things. That's how we elevate the security industry. I think just with everything that's going on, I think a lot of people who maybe didn't before are starting to see the value of security in the healthcare environment. So, it's one of these unfortunate things where a pandemic situation really kind of brings, I guess, the strength.
The value.
The strength. Thank you. The strength and the value of some of what we bring to the table.
Wonderful. Well, it is unfortunate with the pandemic, but it really does highlight the need for healthcare security. There are still so many people out there who wonder why a hospital would need security, and for professionals like ourselves, we know very well why security is essential in in hospital environments.
Absolutely. Actually, I just kind of go off topic here, but I just remember when I first started working in a hospital, I had so many people, and even to this day, sometimes I have people ask, like, why would you need security in a hospital? But yes, I guess some people just don't understand what happens. The amount of workplace violence that we have, the amount of, just the fact that everybody and anybody comes into a hospital. So you're dealing with people of all walks of life. So you have the same demographics that are causing problems in the community coming into our facilities. And I guess a lot of people just don't really, if you're not in the environment, you don't really think of it that way. But yeah, it's actually a common question.
Hmm. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't necessarily touched base on?
Yeah, I guess I'll give a little bit of advice. Some of the things I've learned in my limited time on this planet. But I say use what you can to your advantage. When I look back and just think of how things went and how things could have been different in so many ways, you never know where things are going to lead. One thing for me, obviously, my name is Brine, which is kind of an unusual name. I was named after my dad, and the reason why my dad was named Brine was because my great grandmother's Irish, and she spelt Brian wrong on his birth certificate. She was the one who filled it out. But because I have an unusual name, I've been able to use that to my advantage. It's very easy for me to get email addresses or my website. I was able to get my name, and I don't think most people have that experience. So, to take the things that could be a disadvantage and see how you can turn them around and use them to your advantage. Another thing I'll say is some of the folks in our industry are hesitant to be involved with social media, but I'll say I've made some of my best connections with people who I've met online. So I think you should leverage the platforms like LinkedIn, especially if you consider yourself a professional. That's a place where I think you need to be. And I guess I'll go like, obviously things are changing all the time. A lot of people have met their significant other online, so I don't think it's a big stretch and that's a very common thing now. I don't think it's a stretch for us to meet other professionals online and leverage those relationships and see who you can help and who can help you. And again, I guess I'll reiterate my dad's advice. If you don't ask or if you don't try, it's a no automatically. So just be willing to try things. I think failure or seeing that you're failing in things is just evidence that you're trying new things. So it's important. I guess the only failure is if you don't keep trying. I guess in terms of things that I want to discuss, I think that's really it.
Okay. Any closing message that you'd like to share with the healthcare security cast community?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm very happy with the progress that we've made as a podcast. I didn't know what to expect when I started this endeavor, but I've had a lot of interest. Right now, we're over 1,600 downloads in 26 different countries at the time that we're recording this. So again, that's very exciting. Something that I wouldn't have anticipated, something that I didn't necessarily expect. Like I kind of came in with very little expectations, but as things have progressed, I've kind of adjusted those expectations and try to plan for it. But it's become kind of a bigger thing than I expected, and there's been a lot of interest. So, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Thank you for being involved. Thank you for being engaged. Thank you for giving me ideas. So I guess just thank you is the message I want to share with the healthcare security cast community.
Well, as one of your listeners, I've loved it ever since it came out. I think it's such a creative idea, and I hope you continue to do this for a very long time. And one of the things I wanted to ask in relation to the podcast, when can we start seeing some merchandise on your website
Oh,
for the Healthcare Security Cast?
that's a good question. I guess I'll give a very non-committal answer and say I don't know. That's not but I know that's something that's it's come up a couple of times, and again, another thing I wasn't really expecting. But hey, if people want Healthcare Security Cast merchandise, I'm sure we can make it happen. Anything's possible. It's 2020.
Amazing. Brine, how can we connect with you?
You can connect with me. There's a lot of ways actually. I launched my website brinehamilton.com, where I have access. I'm trying to make it kind of a one-stop shop for healthcare security professionals. So there's links there to the IAHSS website. There's all the archived episodes of the podcast and the kind of the blog posts that come with that. So all of that's accessible there, as well as other ways to listen, other resources. So just always trying to improve the website, but you can go there and you can subscribe for email updates, just so you know what's always going on with the Healthcare Security Cast. So there's that. Again, I talked about social media earlier. So LinkedIn is the biggest one. Feel free to connect with me on there. Facebook as well, if you're not a LinkedIn user. Twitter, I'm on there, but not as much. Instagram, even less. On TikTok, a little bit as well. But it's kind of a platform that a lot of people aren't comfortable with yet. But you can connect with me on any of those. Also, to connect with the Healthcare Security Cast, we do have group pages, and there's a Healthcare Security Cast page and a community page on both Facebook and LinkedIn. So feel free to connect, join those, comment in there, like the pages, follow the pages. It all helps in a lot of different ways. It helps. One thing I'll say is it does help with to show just engagement.
So thank you so much for your time, Brine. I really appreciate you having me come in here and switch roles with you and interview you so all your listeners can get to know you a little better.
Well, thanks for doing this, Sarah. I appreciate you taking the time as well. And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Join us on the next episode when we have a special guest. Watch for the promos. Until next time, take care and stay safe.